Hello, everyone. On behalf of ANROWS, I welcome you to today's webinar on respectful relationships education. My name is Michele Robinson, and I'm the Director of the Evidence to Action team at ANROWS, Australia's national research organisation for women's safety. I acknowledge the country on which we meet today. I am coming to you from the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. On behalf of ANROWS, I pay respects to elders past and present. Wherever we are today, we are on unceded Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander land, and I acknowledge and pay respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people participating in the webinar today. I would also like to express, both for myself personally as well as on behalf of ANROWS, a sense of loss and sadness about the result of the Voice referendum. I acknowledge that this is a particularly difficult time for many First Nations people. The result of the referendum, however, is not the end point, and we remain an ally to the voice that calls for a safer future in the journey towards healing. I also want to acknowledge the enduring nature of First Nations people, especially First Nations women's resistance. The Uluru Statement itself provides the central heart to the work of ending violence against women and children. Incarceration, child removal, and youth detention are all issues that disproportionately impact First Nations people. As the statement says, these are not problems born from a lack of love, rather from a lack of power. It also needs to be acknowledged that there are voices missing from today's conversation, in particular First Nations voices. This will not be the last conversation that we have about this topic, and future iterations will include First Nations men, women, and colleagues from jurisdictions outside of New South Wales and Victoria, as well as more young people. It will not be the last conversation because as we have been made all too aware over the last few weeks, these conversations, especially those focused on action, are urgently needed. As always, we encourage you to take care of yourself. Seeking support and keeping yourself well is an essential part of responding to the needs of young people. If you would like to access support during the webinar, please contact 1800-RESPECT on 1800-737-732 or Lifeline on 131114. Today, we hope that this conversation helps those of you working in this area feel proud of the work that you do and inspired to continue to make a difference. So to frame our discussion today, schools play an important part in a whole of society approach to gender equality. The National Plan to End Violence Against Women and Children 2022 to 2032, as well as Our Watch's evidence-based framework Change the Story, both highlight the critical role of the education sector in preventing gender-based violence. A core part of this is the delivery of respectful relationships education programs. The research we're going to hear about in a minute studied the implementation of a respectful relationships education program in 6 Victorian secondary schools. The research findings provide the evidence that these programs work and should be widely implemented. Usefully, it also tells us about what is needed to implement them effectively. I'd now like to introduce the lead researcher on the project, Emeritus Professor Helen Cahill. Helen specialises in wellbeing interventions, addressing mental health, social and emotional learning, resilience, respectful relationships, and drug education. Helen is a prolific author, and in addition to the many titles she has written, she's also written over 40 wellbeing prevention education programs for schools and communities. The project was also co-led by Professor Dean Lusher of Swinburne University of Technology, who is the co-founder and managing director of SMA Toolbox. Welcome, Helen, and over to you.
Thanks very much, Michelle, and I look forward to speaking with you and sharing some findings from our research. And just before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm joining you from Wurundjeri country and pay my respects from where I sit on this country today. So I'm acknowledging also my colleagues named there on the screen who worked with me on this research, but also the ones who can't be named there because under ethics for doing research with schools, the schools can't be named, but thanking to the teachers, students and school leaders from those schools who through their generosity made it possible for us to have research data collected on this project. So what I'm sharing with you today is about some research we did on an intervention that's in the Victorian jurisdiction through the Department of Education, which is the Resilience, Rights and Respectful Relationships program. We got to research it with years 7 and 9 last year, even though the program, of course, is provided for all students from foundation to year 11 and 12. And I'm just showing you here a brief overview of the structure of the program if you're not familiar with it. It's what's called a combined social emotional learning and respectful relationships education program. And these key topic areas are provided at every level across the curriculum. We made a slight modification to the resource for the purposes of the research trial in order to bring it up to speed with the needs of the day, particularly around consent education. But I'm happy to let you know that the department will very soon be releasing a much updated version of this resource. Just to give you a sense of what's in there, I've just listed the key learning activities that are there at year 7 and year 9. It gives you a bit of a sense of what's in there and also how big the program is. Then we've got quite a number of lessons happening. This is a substantial investment in school education, learning things like, relationship skills and empathy and help seeking and assertiveness. Yeah. This is the foundation of the program. When we get to the later 2 topic areas in the program, there's much more of an explicit focus on gender identities, gender norms, gender stereotypes, power, privilege, and then quite an immersive focus on prevention of gender-based violence, help seeking peer support around violence, looking at the effects of online interactions with violence, violence in pornography, and consent conversations play a big focus of the work. Throughout the whole resource, we take a gender and sexualities inclusive approach. So we are looking at any gendered form of violence against persons of any gender or sexuality. In the research project that we got to do, these were our key aims. We wanted to look at how the program impacted student wellbeing and resilience in general, but also their attitudes around gender and their behaviours around gender and gender-based relationships. We wanted to know how the program influenced their relationships with their direct peers in the here and now. And we also wanted to know, what is it taking for schools to implement a program like this? So I'll share a little bit from each of these questions today. Our findings are huge. There's a gigantic report to read if you want to find out all about it, or there's a nice summary report that will be released as well. Basically, what did we do? We had 6 schools, 4 state schools, 2 Catholic schools. 2 of them were rural or regional. One of the schools was a boys-only school. We captured, from using surveys, data from young people at the beginning and end of the intervention year, which was last year. And in those measures, we looked at things like their gender attitudes, bullying, their social networks with other people in their class. And I'll explain that a little as we go on. At the end, or towards the end of the year, we went in and we talked to groups of young people in focus groups, and we also did interviews with teachers, leaders and school principals associated with what it was taking to implement the program. We do want to acknowledge, though, that the context in which this research was done last year was incredibly challenging. If you remember back to last year, post the lockdowns, especially in Victoria, it was a really challenging year. What did the school people say about that, though? On one hand, it was a positive. As one implementation lead said, we really know we have to work on social skills now. It's clear after the pandemic that this is needed. On the other hand, at the same time, and this was true for every school, as this principal said, there's never been a year so challenging. Though I don't know whether they would have said that now. Maybe this year and last year was never a year so challenging. And the teachers, the workforce are really drained. So the work they were doing was in that context. On the other hand, and I want to acknowledge this, all of those schools, they led with a vision that this was part of their overall vision for what their school would give in terms of their whole school approach. As this principal, the implementation lead said, look, this is something we live and breathe. This is how we approach our relationships. This is what we want to build. Did the program work in any of these areas? Just to show you a little bit of positive data. Overall, we did find reductions in both bullying and sexual harassment in year 7 and 9 when we compared baseline to endpoint. When we were looking at sexual forms of bullying or sexual harassment, we were asking in two areas. One, sexual comments that were made about girls and girls' bodies, and the other one about homophobic teasing. And bullying, we had lots of social behaviours, including name-calling, being mean on social media, and physical violence. But this is kind of all what the picture looked like in terms of we got reductions in bullying of other students and sexually bullying. And these were reductions based on children's self-report of their actions. Why is this important? We didn't get to do this research. We didn't get as much money as they do in America to do research. But people over there who've been doing longitudinal research and following young people as they go from what would be our primary school into our secondary school years find that there's a really strong pathway from bullying. In other words, bullying, people who bully, particularly boys who bully at ages 11 and 12, more likely to go on to do homophobic bullying at ages 12 to 13. And the boys who are using higher levels of bullying and homophobic bullying, by that time they were in high school, were up to 6 times more likely to perpetrate sexual violence. So it is really important that we are interrupting this form of violence pathway. One piece of data I'd like to share about the program is what we found out when we asked students at the end of the program to put in the surveys their ratings of how useful different components of the lessons were. And what you can see from this data here is that students did find the program really useful. Okay, there is a difference between the gender responses. Girls were much more likely, and gender diverse students much more likely to give higher, very, very high ratings of usefulness. But the boys also gave high ratings as well. If you want to compare them, there is one column there that you'll see where the boys did give a higher weighting of usefulness than the other two gender groups. And that was on how to have good friendships. I think we can learn something from that. But overall, I think this is a bit of a message here. If we want to know, is something worth doing, we should go and ask the students themselves, is this working for you? Are you getting something from this? We learned in much more depth what they were valuing when we went in and talked to the focus groups at the end of the year. These were year 7 students I've got on this page talking about how they liked the stuff on emotions, like how to deal with your emotions. The stuff on friendship skills, you know, sometimes your people around you can be upset, you want to be there for them, you need to learn how to do that. Then also this student is talking about how, you know, what do you do if your friend's not okay? You need to really have some skills for that. Some Year 9 students I'm quoting here talking about how they valued the emphasis on consent education. This first student, Year 9 student, most important thing was consent, because when we went over it, what is and isn't consent and knowing those things, it's just good to teach to a broader part of the school. Whole of Year 9 learning that is probably the most important thing. This year's next student talking about the importance of actually learning that it's not just about having a girlfriend, it's about learning how to respect her boundaries. Don't try to push past them, just respect them. And then another student pointing out that for a lot of young people, they don't get to have these conversations with their parents. So it's really useful for them to have it in a structured and supported place at school. We talked to the teachers. It's really important to know whether the program works for the teachers as well. And what they talked about was valuing the teaching methods. They were engaging, they helped students to join in and participate. They also had some insights. Many of them were teaching this kind of stuff for the first time, and they were surprised to find out that students in their class were saying things like, on gender stereotypes, whoa, we never really thought of that before. How girls get commented on their appearance and boys on their ability, like, whoa. So becoming gender aware or becoming aware of gender norms was a really important discovery for the teachers as well as the students, because the teachers presumed their kids already know all this stuff. Then there's also this sort of kind of cautionary advice in a way from the teacher highlighted in the green, that it can be difficult for boys to challenge their peers. That was their experience in that school. But that over time, and it was slow over time, over half a year, she was seeing shifts in that classroom, that peers began to have more confidence in speaking back against those who were expressing negative views. So overall, the endorsement from teachers, the resources were really brilliant because they were also evidence-based and they could even explain to the students why they were doing what they're doing. On the other hand, I think this was true across the board as far as we can see, that at the same time as you think something's good, you can find it really challenging. So the anxiety around teaching sensitive topics like consent and prevention of gender-based violence, teachers can have a worry about making people upset or triggering upset in children who have already been negatively affected or in the middle of a very negative experience. So they're aware that they're having what they call tricky conversations. But let's go back to the classroom. We also, because we were collecting social network analysis data, we were basically, the students had a list of the names of the other kids in their class, and they had to answer questions like, who's a close friend? Who can you work with? Who would you like to work with? Who's disrespectful to you? Who would you like to spend more time with? And then we used that data in a number of ways. So one way we did it was just to show images like the ones you see here, who's connected to who. And that's shown through drawing the arrow to show, the student made a connection, and in some cases the arrow comes right back to them. But what we found that was particularly pertinent, I think, for all teachers to know is that we found that gender divides were the norm in all of the classrooms. School life is gender segregated. Students rarely befriended or said they wanted to work with others of a different gender. And then in the focus groups, we heard from young people that people who cross those divides could often get a lot of sexualized teasing, particularly girls. Now, this is really concerning because those of you who know ANROWS research will know that their study on attitudes towards gender-based violence in the youth disaggregation that they did showed that those young people with mainly male friends were the ones who were less likely to endorse gender equality and more likely to endorse use of violence. So we need to cross the gender segregation boundaries that could be there. What do these boundaries look like? This is what two examples here of two different classrooms, and you can see the gendered nature of the friendships here in the diagrams. So the first is the Year 7 class. They were answering the question of who I like to work with on group tasks. Okay, we've got the girls in the green dots and we've got the boys in those orange dots and a few outliers who nobody is connected to. I'd be worried. We've got a couple of really lonely, disconnected kids in there. Over there on the Year 9, it was a different question. It's the people who I'm close friends with. You see tiny little pockets of friendships, but again, they're primarily based on gender divides. And this is pretty representative of what we found. We used, however, the social network analysis data for other purposes as well. When we dug into the data and we interthreaded it with other data we had on their attitudes to gender, gender equality, use of violence, etc., we found that children, the young people who sexually bully or say they sexually bully others, they declare that with self-report, are friends with those who also do that. And they prefer to be friends with those people, and they aspire to be friends with people who also do that. On the other side, in the different microcosms, if you like, the students who hold high gender equality attitudes were more likely to be socially connected with friends with the same view, prefer to work with those people and want to spend time with them. So we've got subgroups or microcosms in the classroom, and that's important for us to know when we're designing education interventions. Now, overall, of course, when we pulled all our data together, rather than looking at the fine detail of the individual classroom, we saw things that were perhaps unsurprising, that as a group, boys tended to hold significantly higher pro-violence attitudes and lower gender equality attitudes than girls and gender diverse young people. But we also saw that there was a difference between Year 7 and Year 9. Well, there was a difference for boys at Year 7 and Year 9. The girls and the gender diverse young people showed a pretty stable platform, but the Year 9 boys were more likely to show negative attitudes around equality and endorsement of violence than the Year 7 boys. That's not so good. We got to dig into that more deeply because we asked questions around sexual harassment. So one of the questions we asked was, what would be your intention? What would you intend to do if a boy in your class told a sexual joke about a girl in your class? In brackets, in your class, because in the boys' school we just said sexual joke about a girl. And there's a lot of diversity in the responses that we got. So rather than read all this out, I think I'll show you a picture. This picture I'm showing you, first of all, is showing an answer to the question by gender, the proportion of students who said they would intervene. I would do something if this happened. As you can see, the Year 9 boys are the lowest. And then we went to the Year 7 boys, And then there's a fairly kind of even proportion of around a third of year 7 gender diverse, year 9 girls and year 9 gender diverse young people who said they would intervene. And the year 7 girls were more likely to say they would. Now, when we're digging in to look at all of the questions they asked in this theme, I've just got here comparing the year 7 and year 9 boys, because we need to understand what's happening as children age into middle adolescence. You can see here the first one is the proportion of the young boys who said, it wouldn't bother me if this happened. So more year 9 boys said, wouldn't bother me if people tell sexual jokes about girls. Then the next question, we'd feel a bit uncomfortable, but you wouldn't do anything. That kind of gets to that kind of, there could be some risk here in intervening. Less discomfort for the year 9 boys. We've got a fairly stable around a quarter of the boys at year 7 and year 9 who would like to say or do something, but they say they don't know what to do. By the way, girls are much more likely to say they know what to do. The boys are less likely to know what to do than the girls in our data. The drop-off is you would say or do something to show you didn't approve. Okay, so there's a big drop-off there. So we need to understand what kind of pressures young people are under that they are finding that harder and harder to manage potentially as they get to middle high school. Some insights we get about that is from what we got from the student focus groups when we asked them to describe, were they encountering experiences of backlash and resistance from peers in the school environment? And these are the kinds of things they said. Well, look, if you tell someone about it, like the harassment, there's some people are going to get mad at you and you get a lot worse. That's why people don't talk about it. So that's an indicator of how a year 7 person could find it hard to help seek. Year 9 girl here, I go outside and I'm not trying to be stereotypical, but it's the boys who do it. And they'd be like, oh my God, you're touching me. That's assault, that's rape. They joke around on these sensitive topics and it's like a stab in your heart. I think that phrase, it's like a stab in your heart, just as a really poignant reminder of these behaviours matter. They hurt people. And you can see reading the other quotes there that children are really aware there are sub-divides in classrooms. There's these ones who are homophobic and transphobic, and then there's these ones who are not. And that affects your friendships. And then we get also accounts of young people experiencing defensiveness and a kind of that common response that we hear, oh, girls are just as likely to be violent as boys. And they're like, not really. So that kind of defensiveness happening. So given that, was the program able to grow respectful regard in young people and social capability? We had a look at that and we used our resilience measures to track whether we were having growth in social capabilities and relationship values and intentions. What we found is, of course, there was a strong connection between high social capability and respectful regard and rejection of violence. But we found one concerning thing with boys. The boys who showed the higher level of confidence were more likely to hold pro-violence attitudes and lower gender equality attitudes. So this is a really big pointer. Maybe our self-confidence measure was measuring entitlement, not confidence, and we need to think about that. Overall, though, in the high implementing classrooms where the teachers used the collaborative methods, we got growth in social capability and respectful regard. There were lots of factors affecting implementation, though, in schools. We didn't have high fidelity of implementation throughout. Teachers needed access to training. We gave a bit of training, but they didn't all get it. They need in-school support. And there's lots of barriers around curriculum crowding and also backlash, resistance, teacher churn, teacher fatigue. We've put a number of implications in our report for policy at a system level, but basically address curriculum crowding as one of the main things along with teacher development. Give people the resources they need and the time to learn how to use them. At a school level, you've already got good policies to keep the school safe, use them. But what you might not have is time to actually teach the program. Make time to teach a comprehensive program and involve the students in giving you feedback on it. And then at a teacher level, do the stuff you know works. Positive relationships, help the kids get along with each other, help them cross the friendship divides and gender divides, mix them, use the collaborative learning activities and persist. Because for some people with entrenched views, change will take time. So I invite you to consider those implications, and you can read more about it in the snapshot report or the big report when it's all shared with the public.
Thank you so much, Helen. And that report has now been shared, so everybody can have a look at that. It's extraordinary research and very compelling findings. I'd like now to invite our panellists to join us on screen to discuss the implications of the research. And everyone is now going to turn their cameras on as I introduce. So we have Angie Wan, who is the CEO and co-founder of Consent Labs. Welcome, Angie. Paddy Kinnersley, CEO of Our Watch. Hi, Paddy. Megan Kelly, who's the Executive Director of Curriculum and Reform at the New South Wales Department of Education. Bryony Scott, the Principal of Winona, a girls' independent school in New South Wales. Brenna Stojcevski, a Year 9 student who joins us from the Victorian Student Representative Council. Hey, Brenna. And Taj O'Donnell, who is in Year 10 and is also part of the Victorian Student Representative Council. Full bios, which are all very impressive, are available for all of the panellists on the ANROWS event page of our website. And if I went through them, it would take up a very considerable time of the webinar. So we're going to go to you, Brenna. Why do we need respectful relationships education? We have a lot of people joining us today, which is testament to how many people care about this topic. And I wonder if you could start off by telling us a little bit about how, in your experience, programs like this are beneficial for students and for the community more generally.
I think respectful relationship education sets the social dynamics between genders and how to communicate in healthy and safe ways. From what I have seen, there is a dire need for satisfactory, respectful relationships and consent education in school systems. My peers and I have witnessed disrespect disproportionately affecting female-identifying and gender-diverse teachers and students, ranging anywhere between disrespectful remarks and sexual harassment. I've personally seen the entitlement and ignorance of some of my male peers, believing they have the God-given right to objectify and sexualize the women and girls around them. While my school has done their due diligence, they've hired professionals and they've run workshops, it has often fallen flat and emphasized the disparity in understanding consent between female and male students especially. Some male peers have a fundamental misunderstanding of consent and total aversion to listening long enough to understand, made worse by crucial topics not being covered. For example, recently, my school ran a consent workshop teaching different content to the split boy, girl, and gender diverse class. While the other two classes discussed the emotional and psychological ramifications of unsafe relationships, the boys' class were taught why consent is sexy, completely ignoring the harm that non-consensual sex causes. Consent is not just sexy, it is the most basic level of respect you can offer a romantic partner. Consent education should teach students to be empathic, put themselves in someone else's shoes. Something that I've often felt as a girl is an instinctive fear of men and boys. The boys around me have not been taught how to respectfully approach romantic relationships, and I have learned to be always on high alert because of it. Rape culture is an ever-present theme in the lives of teenage girls, with the narrative of compromising relationships completely normalized. All this being said, educators and programs can have incredibly positive outcomes when executed right. My Year 7 and 8 were plagued with disrespect and torment from a group of popular boys whom I'd only become a target to since politely rejecting one of their friends' romantic advances. From the get-go, I sought help from my mum, an accredited social worker, and my best friend. To protect my psychological safety in the school environment, we took it to teachers, and when that didn't work, to the school's leadership. One teacher from leadership was able to single-handedly take the initiative to support me. On multiple occasions, she actively forced this group away from me and ensured all my teachers be aware of the situation so they could act immediately. Connecting back to consent education, due to one boy's inability to take no for an answer, my entire school life was put into jeopardy. Truthfully, I have not yet seen consent education work for my school as a whole, despite the best effort and intentions of some teachers. These programs, however, are crucial for students. I believe they need to keep running and evolving with students to ultimately make a change. Respectfully relating is a societal issue, and the education system is given a captive audience to lead the societal change needed for a safer world. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Brenna. That really is a great scene setting for why we're all here today. Patty, we've heard from Helen about the importance of supportive policy environment in implementing these programs. What does an enabling policy environment look like in practice, and what are the levers that are required or available for policymakers to implement an evidence-based approach to respectful relationships education?
Thanks, Michelle. And I think that Brenna's what she shared with us is exactly why we need a strong policy environment, because we can't leave it to individual students to have to lead this work. So the policy environment is fundamental to the success of respectful relationships education. We know that the deeply entrenched nature of gender inequality across all aspects of society, including our education system, means that we need long-term commitment and a systemic approach to respectful relationships education if we're going to drive catalytic change. We also know that respectful relationships education is key to young people gaining a clear understanding, as Brianna talked about, of respectful consensual friendships and relationships. And it also provides young people with the skills to recognise and challenge harmful behaviours. So an enabling policy environment requires political leadership, sustained resourcing, and it's vital to ensuring that respectful relationships education will be recognised as core business in education departments and schools. So if we think about the enabling policy environment, a lot has happened in recent years that's significant. We have a national plan to end violence against women and children, and it lays out a shared vision for Australian governments to end gender-based violence in a generation. But it's a blueprint that tells everybody from governments to all sectors across the country they've got a job to do, including the education settings. As we speak, the Commonwealth Government has also established a National Respectful Relationships Education Expert Working Group to support the delivery of evidence-based respectful relationships education across jurisdictions in school settings, across every jurisdiction. We've seen the Australian curriculum updated to include age-appropriate content and consent and respectful relationships education in the HPE domain. More recently, we've witnessed recommendations from the inquiry into current and proposed sexual consent laws in Australia, which recommended sufficient funding for evidence-based RRE in schools. And at a more jurisdiction level, over the last 8 years, we've seen a significant shift in policy in both Victoria and Queensland, which have created enabling policy environments for whole of school approach to RRE, including long-term commitment for funding, resources, creation of prevention workforce, the implementation of a comprehensive professional learning strategy for all school staff. And I would just say too that every jurisdiction is doing work in this space, and Megan, who's with us from New South Wales Government, will talk a bit more about this, but they're developing a whole prevention strategy and doing work to make sure that they are setting a policy environment. So thanks, Michelle. We can talk for a long time about their policy environment, but there's just a few things that are happening.
Thanks so much, Patty. And I will throw to you, Angie, just to see if you wanted to add anything at this point. And then Megan, if you had a specific policy platform or lever that you're working with at the moment in New South Wales, we'd love to hear about that as well.
Thanks, Michelle.
Yeah. Hi.
I think I echo everything that Patty and Brenna have said. You know, Consent Lab started initially as a grassroots organisation. We are a youth-led organisation, and it started with young people really pushing for and championing the need for consent education, initially in just New South Wales schools. And we started at a time where there wasn't much support in terms of policy and at an institutional level for this type of education. This was back in 2016, and it was stifling, to be honest with you. It is really hard to gain traction without the support of without the support of policy. But I think, as Patty sort of said, there has been so much traction and so much change at state and territory and at federal levels in the past 2.5 years alone. And I think that just really goes to show how instrumental policy and government is in moving forward social justice issues, particularly in, the space that we're all working in. To that, I would say, I think it's really important that we always keep a lived experience focus front and center. This is something that we, really champion at Consent Labs, being a youth-led organisation, is students are ultimately on the receiving end of respectful relationships education. And so I think it's really imperative that at every stage of the journey, or as we speak about policy, that young people and students are actually consulted. And so I really urge us to I guess, think about how we're doing that meaningfully.
Yeah, thanks, Angie. And I think, Megan, if you wanted to, we are going to go to you next in terms of what's happening at the education level in New South Wales. But just from a systems perspective or policy perspective, it'd be really great to hear from you.
Yeah, so I think from a policy perspective, the frameworks that we use in our schools is essentially our curriculum. And so those syllabus documents really do provide that evidence base and give teachers the support and I guess that guidance around how to teach respectful relationships education. So, yeah, really important part. And as a system, we have a really important part to play in the way that we support our schools and teachers. So I might just jump into that if that's okay with you, Michelle. So we can see that there are lots of connections we've made with Helen's research, and certainly more that we can draw on in the work that we're doing. But not dissimilar to other jurisdictions, students in our schools are explicitly taught respectful relationships education through our PDHPE syllabus in an age-appropriate way from kindergarten right through to year 10. But in New South Wales, we also have another mandatory course, which we call Life Ready, and this gives students an extra 25 hours where they are in years 11 and 12 building on that respectful relationships education as well. As an organisation, our approach to supporting curriculum implementation is to help everyone involved in that delivery of learning in our schools with the right support, the right advice and the right resources they need to be able to do their work, whether it's the principal in the school or our middle leaders or our classroom teachers. As you've heard, we are undergoing a reform of curriculum in New South Wales. Every syllabus is being reviewed and rewritten, and including this content for teaching RRE is included in that. So these new syllabuses, they are built on a strong evidence base, and when we design our support and resources for teachers, we're drawing on this evidence. We're working really closely with academics and other experts in the field to co-design with us and to quality assure our materials. We know it can be challenging for teachers, and we've heard that in what we've covered already in the presentations, and we need to help them build their skills and build their confidence in being able to teach this material. So to do that, we are producing resources, really detailed resources, which cut down on workload for teachers, but it also shows them the content and the pedagogical practices that are needed to be able to teach this well. And what we're hearing is when we're doing this, it is increasing teacher confidence to deliver this really complex content. And we know that when teachers feel more confident, they're going to be more likely to embed it into the programs that they're teaching. In core to our lessons too is providing students with the tools to think critically about real life situations and helping them to assess and adapt their own values, their attitudes and their behaviours. So our lessons are interactive and participatory. They include group work, cooperative learning, discussions, role plays and behaviour rehearsal. And we know that these teaching strategies allow our students to develop those really important social and emotional skills that have been called out in Helen's research. So supporting teachers with evidence-based research is one area of support, but we also deliver professional learning for our teachers. And in this, we do include videos to demonstrate how to use these teaching strategies, what they look like in practice when they're using them in the classroom. Another important part for us, or a piece of work that we're focused on at the moment too, is bringing our parents and carers along this learning journey with us we are seeing some resistance from sections of our community about their children engaging in this kind of material. And this puts additional pressure on our teachers and our school leaders. And so we need to increase our support for our schools so they can hit that sweet spot of being able to develop and deliver programs that meet student needs, as well as reflecting community context and expectations. We know these conversations are tricky for parents, and Brenna, I think you mentioned that as well, that sometimes these things don't happen at home. And so it is difficult for parents to have these conversations. And we have also got some specific information on consent for parents to empower them to have these conversations, to understand the learning and access resources for their children. We're holding webinars for parents. We've got information on our website and information letters that are translated in multiple languages. So we know this is a challenging area and it's one we want to keep strengthening, but we are absolutely committed to ongoing investment in this work. Thanks, Michelle.
Thanks, Megan. That's quite a list. And I just wanted to check in and clarify, as part of that co-design process, was the voice of the student or the young person included?
Yes, and I believe that a lot of the materials were tested with students too before they were finalised and published. Yeah.
Great. Patty, you've been doing work in that area as well. Did you want to add anything?
To be honest, that was a fabulous description by a systems response to providing support and building capacity. We all know that school staff are under pressure to do more and more training, but we absolutely know that the confidence and knowledge of schools, of all staff, to support the implementation of RRE is fundamental to the success of it. So if you think about the Queensland and Victoria example, or what's just been shared with us so beautifully, is that this work must be supported by a whole strategy, a professional learning strategy supported by the Department of Education and implemented in full, and not left to individual teachers to try and educate themselves. So I think I probably would just build on what Megan has shared with us.
And Megan, you did pick up on resistance, and there will be some resistance and backlash explored further. I just wanted to let you know, Brenna, there's a lot of very positive feedback from your the story that you told earlier, and you've even been called a social justice champion. I don't know if you can see some of the chat, but thank you again for really setting the scene and what is an incredibly important conversation. So Taj, let's go to you. We're going to you sit on the Victorian Department of Education's Respectful Relationships Advisory Group, and I know that you're really passionate about the inclusion of the student voice, which Megan has just clarified has been incorporated into the work that the New South Wales Department of Education has been doing. In your experience, what has worked and what hasn't in relation to including students in the design and delivery of respectful relationships education programs?
Yep. I have the unique, I have the unique opportunity to be on this amazing group in Victoria called VicSRC. We are the Victorian Student Representative Council. We are for students, run by students, and we have some amazing programs. One of these is Congress. Congress is a yearly event where a group of students band together and figure out what VicSRC's main topics or themes for the year will be. This is what our advocacy cycle and what we advocate for the next year is based off. And I can tell you that every year I've been in VicSRC, and way before that, consent ed and mental health, respectful relationships, all of this has been a major thing that students have brought up with us on a yearly basis. Students are always extremely passionate about this subject and always willing and want to talk about it and engage with how it can work. This is why it needs to be done in a good way, though this isn't always the case. I have had some good experiences, but then also some not so good ones with how student voice is taken upon the school and other organizations to get an opinion from students. Some of these are focus groups, which can be a good way of getting a student's opinion, though sometimes we are intimidated by adults, even though you guys don't always try to intimidate us, and I don't think you guys are actively doing that. It's just sometimes not the best environment for us. Though it is important to get a wide variety of student voices. So anonymous surveys and just reaching out can be an amazing way to get anyone, because if they don't have to show their face or don't have to connect themselves to something, students are way more likely to communicate what they feel. Though there always have been positive experiences. I remember in year 9, I believe, my school was trialing out a new consent ed program, and they got a bunch of the year 9 leaders in a room, and we actually just did the program just before anyone else had ever seen it for the school. And we were able to give our honest opinions on if we thought it would work and what we thought about it. Experiences like these and opportunities like these are amazing for students to connect with these programs. And I definitely feel like any trialing or just testing on students is just an absolutely amazing way to include students in this process.
Absolutely. From your experience, that has really improved the delivery of the program that was subsequently delivered?
Yes. I don't know if the program was delivered after our response from it, but you could definitely tell they were taking on our advice.
Yeah. Great. Thanks, Taj. Brenna, did you have anything that you wanted to add in terms of what's worked and what hasn't?
I've seen that a lot of my peers actually do have a lot of thoughts on what we're taught and the curriculum that's being presented to us. So I completely agree with Taj. The opportunities where we've been active participants in what we're taught and we've been able to give feedback, especially anonymously, because in a high school environment, to put yourself forward as someone who stands with this cause or believes in this can be incredibly daunting, especially with what Helen was talking about, sexual bullying and bullying in general. It can be actually unsafe. So to have this like anonymous advice is incredibly useful.
That's great. Thank you both so much. I think that's incredibly helpful to everybody listening and to the panel as well. Bryony, I'm going to introduce you to the conversation. Hello.
Hi.
So the research has revealed that it was much easier to implement the respectful relationships education if the mission of the school aligned with that of the program. Has this been your experience? And just to more broadly, can you talk to us about the barriers and the enablers that you've experienced at the school level in terms of implementing the respectful relationships education programs?
Yeah, I certainly can. Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you particularly to Taj and Brenna for your insights. What I'm going to say, first of all, might sound disrespectful to young people, but I just want you to bear with me. I think we put an extraordinary pressure on them to have to explain to us why this is all happening and why they have to come back to us with what it is that they want so that the harassment goes away. In my experience, most young people don't want adults in their life. They've got a great social life. They enjoy going to school. They've enjoyed their friendship. They reach out to adults when things are starting to go wrong, and they are relying on adults to help them navigate through, not to fix everything for them, but to help keep them safe as they navigate through. And I believe passionately in student voice. I also believe that as adults, we have a responsibility, and I mean, we're preaching to the converted probably in this group, but to act like adults. And I think it's very difficult for young people to go, this is what we want, when they look out there in the media and they look out there online and they see the way we treat each other and we speak to each other and we hear about what happens in Parliament House and we hear what happens in the army in these different contexts. And there's an element of this that goes for everything that we're asking our young people to deliver on, to come up with the answers about what they need and what they want and how we can help them. We also need to, as adults, step back and go, what are we actually doing ourselves? Because a big part of growing up is looking for cues as to how to behave, but looking to the adults around you and going, well, how are they reacting in that situation? And what are they doing? And you learn by watching adults and how they respond in different situations to learn how you can behave. And if we're behaving like children and we're expecting the children to behave like adults, it's just all mixed up. And so when you go, well, what are the barriers? I go, actually, I think the barriers are that adults don't really behave that well in public. And so I find it really challenging to then go, okay, young people, you tell us what you need and what you want, and we deliver the programs and we have to normalize that, but we also have to back it up with action ourselves. So that's a roundabout way to go. Are there barriers to implement them in school? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we can put any programs that we want in schools. We can train up our teachers, we can do it, but unless we start believing this as a society, unless we start taking seriously, how many women are being killed in intimate partner relationships and actually doing things about this, there will always be a gap between our intentions and the practice. And young people now, I think, and this is huge generalization as well, they have their own experiences that are all different from each other. They're not a homogenous group. So what works for one group of young people may not work for another. They have different life experiences. So even if we teach a program, it all plays out in a context. And previously, in previous generations, they might have belonged to a church or a sporting group. They might have had extended family. So many of our young people are growing up now in smaller families without those big social structures. So the schools are delivering them. When they deliver them, there has to be this nuance that goes, who I have in my class, I might have 30 kids. 3 or 4 of them might be in abusive relationships at home. A couple of them might be experiencing domestic violence themselves. A number of them sexually, been in situations where they've been assaulted or harassed. And so how do you sensitively temper the message for where those people are, not only in their own experiences, but then where they are as they journey through those experiences and try to make sense of it in a world that largely condones or turns a blind eye to them. So yeah, there are a few barriers, which doesn't mean we don't do it, but it's just a very complex ecosystem.
Absolutely, and it really takes a multi-pronged approach to prevent and respond to violence against women and children. Absolutely, and education is one part of that. What about in terms of enablers? What's helped in terms of the programs being implemented and effectively at the school level?
It's a really good question. For us, we like every school is so different, and so much of it, I think, actually comes down to the leadership and what the leadership values. So, for example, around gender equity, you can have, sexist co-ed schools, you can have sexist single-sex schools, you can have sexist every type of school, and you can equally have egalitarian, very respectful schools across all sectors. It depends a lot, for me, on the culture of it. I know that there's money and time and training that's required, but what we're wanting is people who come into these situations, who are doing this, who go, I get why we're doing this. And for me, because I'm in all girls, but I have taught co-ed and I have taught boys, we now go way past what is expected at a systemic level, and we teach our young people about literally everything around respectful relations and consent from the beginning, all the way through to what do you do when your boss puts his hand on your knee, all the way through to what do you do if you're sexually assaulted, all the way through to recognizing what love bombing, how you get out of a controlling relationship, because we, on the cold face, you're dealing with the implications of not educating people that way. So I think you go, what's an enabler? I go, yes, time, yes, money. A society that actually agrees with what we're doing will help. And then also a real passionate belief that we really don't want our young people being hurt like this over and over again.
Thanks, Brenna.
I don't know how you quantify that, but it actually is. It's a really big part of it.
But I think you also spoke in terms of that continuum of sexual harassment and sexual violence, and I think that's a really important place to begin in education. I'm going to introduce and bring Angie into the conversation, and it's sort of a segue from what Bryony was talking about. Angie, can you talk to us about the implications of the national mandate to teach consent? And how do you see it sitting alongside the findings from the report about the importance of a holistic approach to respectful relationships education?
Thanks, Michelle. I mean, I think the move towards a focus on consent federally across all states and territories has been really fantastic progress that we've seen in the past year or two. I think up until then, the way that states and territories approached consent and respectful relationships education had been incredibly fragmented, meaning that education was not being delivered in an accessible or an equitable manner. And I think that is a real disservice to young people. You know, I've always considered the Victorian curriculum and, you know, the program that you've delivered, Helen, to be incredible, but unfortunately not all states and territories have access to such material. And I think that, yeah, is a real shame that just because you might not be based in Victoria, you don't get access to better quality learning materials. So I think it's a real step in the right direction. But my mind then immediately jumps to the implementation of respectful relationships education federally, and how can we make sure that it's still done in a way that is sensitive to local context and local community, addressing the individual needs of the students and the sort of broader school community. And how do we make sure that it's being done well with programmatic integrity and it's being done? How do we measure success? Which I think is something that we'll chat about a little bit later on in this webinar. And I think part of the answer to that question is a theme that's been touched on quite a lot in this webinar already, but it's supporting educators and supporting their professional learning or professional development opportunities of educators to be able to implement this national mandate well and in an effective manner. And to the second part of your question, Michelle, I think the research that Helen drew on, which spoke to the fact that you can't only teach people, or you can't assume self-confidence or high levels of confidence is a tick box in pro-gender equality attitudes or an understanding of respect for relationships, but instead to really broaden our understanding of what respect for relationships or consent education actually means and what that looks like, to also include understanding of what empathy is. And that was something that you spoke to so beautifully, Brenna, in the first comments that you made, and ensuring that when we talk about consent, it's ensuring that young people understand it's important, not only so you don't go to jail, but because you actually care about what someone else thinks of, and you care about their boundaries and whether they're comfortable and how it feels for yourself as well. So I think centering the social and emotional capability and ensuring that that is something that all young people feel really comfortable with doing, whether it's in the context of a sexual or romantic relationship as well as a platonic relationship, I think that sets them up to be able to engage in respectful relationships meaningfully across their life.
Yeah, thanks, Angie. I think it does indeed. And Helen, I was going to bring you back in at this point just to see if you wanted to expand a little on what Angie's talked about in terms of the importance of the holistic approach around social and emotional wellbeing.
Yeah, I really do want to speak to that, and also to have us not forget the children. And this is where focusing on the word consent gets a bit tricky, because children are not under 12, not consenting. But we do also need to help teach them about their rights, to their body boundaries, to their autonomy, to speak to their early warning signals when something doesn't feel all right, and their right not to be told to keep a secret by an adult, which is a long-lasting secret that they have to keep from important near and dear people. All these are danger signs, right? So if we're putting in this we can get a little bit wrapped up just with the word consent. We also have to be talking about prevention of gender-based violence in all its forms, not only its sexual forms, but all its forms. And we have to be talking about the promotion of respect as the inherent value that we want all human beings to be able to show respect for all other human beings and for their planet. Okay, so this big focus on respect, the time is now. So I just want to have a little bit of a shout out, though, also on the importance of the enablers for the teachers. We want teachers to go courageously into lands where most parents fear to tread. And we didn't give them a lot of help yet. Policy helps protect their back, makes them feel safe. Curriculum gives them a permission to spend time on it. They already got a commitment and care for kids. That's why they're there in that profession. But if they're scared and lacking in courage, the community needs to give them the courage. Let's acknowledge that teachers are being incredibly worn thin by aggression, backlash, criticism, and we rarely give teachers what I would call enabling data. The most enabling data is when children and young people say, that was so good, that was useful. Can we do more of that? And can everybody else have this too? So let's bring these voices into the picture. And the other thing I would say, can we enable our teachers by giving them a chance to do these activities for themselves? Because most of the workforce never got a chance to do this for themselves. And once they do, that's really enabling for them to understand its worth in education, for them to make time to do it. They know it's going to be good for them and good for the students. So I think at a very human level, we have to be talking about things like courage and the underpinning ethics of care, which underpin the whole venture in the first place. We're teaching this because we want children to be able and young people to be able to care for each other.
Thanks, Helen. I think that's a really important message, courage and the ethics of care. One of the really exciting things about the research I found was the extra layer of information that the social network analysis gave us. And it stood out to me in the findings that classroom relationships were so starkly divided by gender. Like I found that quite important, but that peer groups had a tendency to reinforce attitudes or behaviour, which can be generally understood. I think for going, and the voice of the young people in this question is going to be really important. I'd like to start with you, Bryony. Has this been your experience in a school setting?
Broadly, boys hang with boys and girls hang with girls.
And the reinforcement of the attitudes and behaviours within a peer group.
It's really interesting from a developmental point of view. My understanding is that it's often quite natural and normal for the same genders to stick together for a while, for a season. And the challenge is that a functional, positive experience for them that then gives them the courage to kind of go out and to meet other people and to interrelate. And even, girls who have lots of brothers, happy to hang with the brothers, but not necessarily with the brothers' friends. And to my mind, that's quite a normal part of growing up. Where it becomes dysfunctional in my experience is when it becomes a little like Lord of the Flies, where a dominant thought comes in about what that means to be male or what that means to be female. And so I thought that was really interesting research that came up around how given the choice, they will still at that young age, 7 to 9, tend to gravitate in groups. That I don't think is so much a challenge. It's what then happens, and the idea about the confidence and where are these young men getting the ideas about what it means to be a man, and what are these young women, where are they learning about what it means to be a young woman? And in my experience as well, of course, we're talking about students who fall along a spectrum, that the differences within each gender are at least as great, if not greater, than the differences between the genders. So, there's all sorts of challenges there. So, yes, I have seen it. That element of them grouping, I think, appears to me to be a very safe way of growing up. It's the challenge now is, yes, well, what's the narrative within those groups and who's influencing those? And that, I think, once again, comes down to education, role modelling, what language are we using? And I think there's a really lazy default, particularly when it comes to young men, around around how they describe themselves, but in fact those defaults can happen for women too. So it's constantly challenging that I think becomes really important.
Thanks, Bryony. And Brenna and Taj, would you like to talk more about your experience of peer behaviour or pressure, and the way in which what the implications of that has been for either of you? Taj, you're off mute. Do you want to start?
Yeah, I'd love to start. I found there's this weird thing where I feel it's especially that safety, and I found that thinking back to my primary school years, which is ages away now, pre-COVID, but back when it was then, like grade 5, I felt like I definitely hanged out with boys a lot more as a boy. But then weirdly in year 6, when it was all coming to a close and where I was less likely to see everybody again, I felt like I was more active and had more friend groups, especially with like girls and other genders. And I feel this happens again in high school, where it's this cycle where you start safety. And I definitely felt that in year 7 when new environment. I have an experience where I had literally none of my friends in my high school. I knew absolutely nobody. So I think I quickly clustered to some guys, and I'm very lucky with who I clustered to, but I definitely feel like it becomes firstly safety, and you become like safety in your classroom, because that's an environment where you want to be yourself, but you want to make sure it's just you're safe about it, because it's new and it's like a new experience. But then when it gets later, you start branching out more. And I know I can describe myself as a floater, where I have a lot more different friendship groups, which I'm able to go into, like the drama kids, the more sporty kids, and I feel later in high school, and I'm year 10, and I'm definitely interested if it's unique to my high school, Brenna, but I've started branching out a lot more, and I feel that's also, maybe it is my high school and the attitudes that my high school gives me, especially in the social settings. So yeah.
Thanks, Taj. Yeah, no, that's really interesting to see that trajectory that you've experienced. Brenna, did you want to touch?
Yeah. I was just going to say, I agree with both Bryony and Taj. On this topic, I think, especially going into high school, my experience was I was trying to branch out, meet a lot of new people. That wasn't specifically like segregated. I engaged with a lot of new people. It only started cutting down once I got to year 8, and once I saw a very evident change in how the boys around me were acting, how they were talking, how they were treating me as a friend. I noticed that change, and so I deliberately moved away because it felt unsafe, it felt uncomfortable. And right now I am someone who presents as hyper feminine a lot of the time. I talk about stereotypically girly things. That's where I kind of place myself on the gender spectrum, and that is often judged by the boys around me. But thinking about it in regards to girls and the stereotypes that come with girls and how they learn from their role models, you'll often see around this age, especially year 9, girls have a tendency to sexualize themselves because that's what they see is the norm. That's what they see they should be doing. And that obviously leads to incredibly unhealthy romantic relationships, especially heterosexual relationships. But yeah, especially, I think boys also have the same issue with, they see the role models around them having this hyper masculine, super muscly appearance, super macho disposition all the time, and they take that on.
Absolutely, it's modelled, and I think it goes to what Bryony was saying earlier. Thank you. Thanks, Brenna and Taj. Your input is so critical, and there is lots of fantastic feedback as well. So to the Q&A, and some of the questions that came through the registration, but they've been coming through the Q&A as we've been going. So I'm going to throw to some of those. And one of them in particular, there's a big one around the increase of misinformation as well as resistance to respectful relationships education programs. And the findings clearly show, as you've pointed out earlier, Helen, that both students and teachers have benefited incredibly from them and how useful they've been in terms of the feedback and the self-reported feedback. And so I know you'll have something to say about this, but Helen, would you like to start us off on where the resistance and misinformation is coming from?
I think we have to acknowledge that we're living in a dual pandemic time. There was the COVID pandemic, but during that whole time and since, there's been a pandemic of misinformation or deliberately wrong disinformation, harmful, and a normalisation of aggressive forms of interaction, violent speech, an incredible normalisation of backlash against schools and what teachers are doing in schools. We see it most floridly in the States, but it's here too. So and it's not only about this issue, social emotional learning and respectful relationships, it's about all sorts of other issues as well. So we're living in an era where violence has become floridly normalised in human discourse in the last 3 or 4 years. And so this backlash and resistance, I try to understand it. Sometimes it comes from a place of fear. Sometimes it comes from a place of entitlement. Sometimes it's a mix of both. Sometimes it's just a place of belonging that people get caught up in and they genuinely believe something is right. Sometimes it's an ideology that's given them safety and security. But whatever it is if the people are expressing their backlash and resistance in violent or aggressive ways, what's not happening is respect. And so sadly, I think we do need to help our educators understand backlash when it's expressed. We had teachers in the study talking about how confronted they were in the first time in their careers to have children, some young people, stand up and use Andrew Tate to justify their misogynistic views in the classroom and defend their right to using hate speech. Now, usually in the past, it was like if you said bad stuff like that in class, you were told off, you go, and you kind of take it on the chin or you know, whatever. You don't justify your right to be speaking like that. So these are added challenges of our times. They're coming from multiple sources. It's complex. And this is also why we need to highlight this work is done in a research-informed way of the value of care and respect. We know it makes a difference. It decreases social violence. It improves mental health and wellbeing. It improves relationships. We have clear evidence of that from other studies around the world. We need to stand on that and we need to help teachers know that. But please, oh please, we need more than policy and curriculum. We need some community voices stepping up to say thank you to schools for taking on this work and provide them encouragement and support.
Yes, you've mentioned the community voice a few times now, and I think that's really critical. I'm going to ask you, Patty, you've obviously wanted to talk to this point, but yeah, what do you think about the community voice and how could we incorporate that?
It's vital, and Helen's articulation of what's happening with backlash is beautiful, and we face it all the time in watching our work to prevent violence against women, particularly around the acceptance that gender inequality or disrespect towards women, and then other forms of disrespect such as racism or homophobia, are actually the reason that violence happens against women. And I'm shortcutting that a little bit. But in terms of respectful relationships education, what's so important is that we build awareness of why primary prevention is important and why it's an important part of the education system and how it can contribute to improving mental health and social health. So we need to bring people along. Engaging with families and communities is a vital part of the readiness phase of school-based implementation of RRE. And schools and individuals within schools have to feel supported and confident in the approach. So as Helen said, it's evidence-based. But it also includes making sure that their messaging to parents and to community leaders is correct and they can feel confident in it and there's a reason for doing this in their school. So we've suggested, and a lot of schools have been doing this, the development of an actual communication strategy. So you sort of don't leave it to chance or the one or two people who are good at it. It's actually a strategy that sits around your RRE work, and it's co-designed by students, and we clearly can hear why that's important today with our student voices in the room. But co-designed by students, teachers, experts, parents, and the education system. And then that strategy enables clear, consistent messaging. It gives people Q&A. It gives people, Helen talked about the policy environment, but it also gives them the confidence that they're supported by their schools. And so I think that that's a really important part of this work. And it's not something schools have to do on their own. We're doing it as an organisation. Governments are needing to do it. Even workplaces are needing to do it in their efforts to create safe, equal, respectful workplaces. So I think it's a structured and important part to bring communities, families along on this journey.
Bryony, what about you? You're a working principal. Who do you look on as part of the community to support respectful relationships education in your school?
Oh, sorry, what was the first part of the question? Sorry.
Who do you bring along as part of the community? Like, who do you draw on, and what do those partnerships look like?
It's a very good question. Not a lot. We go out to the community. We can afford to do that because we're an independent school, so we don't have a big system that in a sense we have to wait for the guidelines. So I think we recognise in our particular setting that because there is a lack of community leadership, if the schools don't speak up and speak out, then I don't know who else will, because in a sense, at least people, they have to send their children to school, right? So it does become the one big community hub that is the source of support and help. So, I mean, I just love this. I was thinking about what Helen was saying about, policy has their back, curriculum gives them the framework. And then this third thing about the adult courage makes the difference. And I remember when I spoke out a bit around the consent thing when the Chanel Contos survey first came out. And I'm very cognizant that we are predominantly talking about sexual consent and so forth, but this does apply across all forms. So it's just the example that we're using. But hearing from teachers and students in other systems who felt that they couldn't speak out. And so I do think there is something about overtly giving people permission to take on this role. So to encourage, to give courage to them, I think is really important, because the forces coming the other way are huge. And they are, I mean, I look at this now, we've had a little obnoxious group of year nines who've been bullying some kids, right? I know they're bullying them. They know they're bullying everyone. You pull the parents, and it's like, well, where's the evidence? And you watch them burn their way through the leadership levels of the school till finally they get to me. And I go, I don't need to provide evidence for you. I can tell you there's a charred path behind your daughter of everywhere she's gone, like leaving little bodies in her wake. She is obnoxious, but it takes such courage when you have a parent in full force going, absolutely no way, not my child. And you're like, well, okay, it's not my job to convince you. It's your job to go, this is my kid. Is this what I wanted to be like at 25 or 35? Like, no, it's far better that we sort it out at 15.
Yeah. Brenna.
I just wanted to say, on top of that point, a lot of the role models that my peers and I think high school students and students generally relate to and like model their behavior off of are their parents. And so in instances where they're not respecting consent education and they're being disruptive in class, they're being disrespectful, they're using hate speech, it's very likely something that they've seen from their parents. And so trying to kind of counteract that with the help of said parents can be very difficult to work around.
Absolutely. And Patty, did you have something that you wanted to say to that?
Sorry, I was just actually thinking about, I was in my head, a picture was starting to form about the policy behind curriculum in front, courage of leaders, and then the evidence base surrounds all of it. So it might not be what you want to hear now, but just as this amazing group is speaking, you're kind of starting to form this picture about we all know that the evidence base is absolutely vital, and the evidence base is actually quite deep. And you listen to what Helen's been talking about, and you listen to Bryony, whose evidence base comes from actually doing it in real life for a long time, at least half of her life. And then you hear the voices of the young people kind of bringing it to life. And it's all of that, isn't it? It is the policy, it's the curriculum, it's the courage of individual, in particularly leaders, but the evidence base is what drives the thing. And it's so important that we all continue to bring all of those parts together as we move forward. Sorry, Michelle, I was probably a bit off track there, but that's what was bubbling in my head.
No, that was perfect, Patty, because one of the questions that has come through is, we've heard a lot about the evidence base, what works. And so while the research tells us the importance of the evidence-based approach, evidence underpins everything you do. And so at our watch, it's incredibly important in terms of the basis upon the work, which or what underpins the work. And you're working on the national expert group. What would you, in addition to what you've just said, what would you say about the importance of the evidence-based approaches in terms of your work on that group? Like, is it what you've heard today feeds into that so directly?
It does, and it's the evidence also kind of helps straighten up the conversations, regardless of where they're at. So, you know, the core elements of respectful relationship education, and Helen will articulate them more beautifully than I, but we've got to address the gender drivers. We've got to take a whole of school approach. We've got to support change by professional development and learning. We've heard so much about that. It's got to be age appropriate. It's got to be sustained commitment from governments and others. We've got to support cross-sectorial collaboration in the schools and outside, and we've got to evaluate for continuous improvement. But what I've seen over time, and I'm sure other people have as well, is I'll be in the room where people will go, could we do respectful relationship education and not worry about that gender thing? We go, well, no, we actually can't, because here's what the evidence tells us. Here's who's perpetrating violence. These are the underpinning drivers. And so we've actually got to move forward with that. And it's helped in that respectful relationships education expert working group. And even I also have the privilege of being on the working group, Minister Clare, Commonwealth Education Minister's work about preventing sexual assault and sexual harassment in universities. And it's the same conversation today, it's just in a university context. But again, what does the evidence tell us we need to do, which has been built in Australia over a couple of decades now? I think that work would have been in a different place if we didn't have the evidence base to go, actually, these are the things you need to do a whole of institution approach to preventing sexual assault and sexual harassment, exactly the same as what we're talking about today, exactly the same as what we're talking about in workplaces. And the key part of the evidence too is that it's not up to schools alone. It's not up to just teachers or parents. It is workplaces. It is sporting organisations. It is the government. And so the evidence is absolutely vital. And it's the one thing that's holding us, you know, to Bryony's point, we are literally standing in a fast-flowing water coming the other way at us, trying to unpick women's rights, LGBTIQA plus rights. Helen's example about young people standing up and quoting radical theory of Andrew Tate and others, that's coming at us like a fast-flowing water. The thing we've got that's keeping us moving forward at all is the evidence base.
Thanks, Patty. Absolutely. And, you know, from a research organisation, I can't more emphatically agree with you. Bryony, you had your hand up then.
I was just thinking, just really quickly about, you know, we're talking about how it all plays out in the adult workforce. I remember when they came back with the findings from the Royal Commission into Institutionalised Child Abuse, one of the big sub-findings that they stumbled across, which they hadn't intended to, was just the levels of peer-on-peer assault that's happening in schools. And so what happens at the university level, when they did those investigations into the universities and what was happening there, that doesn't happen when a child turns 18, you know. So there's a real sense, which goes back to that need again for education around, you cannot control how a child will behave, but what we have no excuse for is to make sure they don't know how they should have behaved. And so long as we're getting that education out, then how a person, whether they're 12 or 22 or 52, responds to it is ultimately up to them. But we can go, at least we have given them everything they need to know now, so they're not acting like jerks when they're, you know, at university or in the workplace.
Helen, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I just want to say, you know, from the young people that we research with, they also say We want to know how we could behave.
Mm-hmm.
Please help us learn all the social skills and comfort and confidence that we need to have good relationships, so that we can also have good relationships in trickier situations, like when there is, you know, other forms of sexual tension happening or whatever. So we've got 50 years of research into bullying prevention in schools. Unfortunately, it never switched on the gender lens. We're adding that now, but we've already got stuff to learn from that. The most powerful thing is enable the people around the affected parties. When they know that the people around them are going to be standing up for good ways to treat people, they're going to feel safer to do that too. We also have now 50 years of social emotional learning research, which shows that just teaching us how to relate well, like relationship skills, also reduces homophobic violence and gender-based violence. So there's no excuse for us not to use this evidence base. The only problem is we have not made an adequate home in the timetable. It does not all fit in subject health. And until we radically have the courage to actually redesign the shape of the school curriculum for the era we live in now, to make room for the things we most need now, we're not going to have enough time. So, you know, what we really have to ask for too is more courage around reshaping the school curriculum. It's a great advance to have consent listed there now in the curriculum, but it's not enough. The home it's living in is so tiny, it's not enough. So let's also be giving our systems the freedom to rethink what schooling for the 21st and towards the 22nd century, where these young people will be alive, hopefully, if they live as old as me, that we actually make it fit for purpose for them.
Thanks, Helen. We have had so many questions that I am going, and I know that Helen will be responding to some of them. But one last question before I move into what's your takeaway from each of the panelists is, how do we measure success? Like, this has been a recurrent question throughout the webinar. How do we measure success? I'm going to start with you, Bryony. What's your sense of it as the school principal on the call?
Yep. I have two measures of success. One, because I'm a teacher, I know that I sow seeds that will not bear fruit potentially in my lifetime. So I will never see truly what the benefits of what I do or not, because it's when a child is 35 or 45 or 55, and I go, are they making good, respectful, ethical decisions around how they're going about the world? That's the first thing. The second thing for me is I don't want to leave. I'm now of an age where I really do not care what people think of me. I care I want people to like me, obviously, like anyone else. But I get to the point where I go, I am dealing with these children after they've been disrespected in whatever form it is. Mm. And so I have no issue going out there, and my measure of success is that there would be more people who had the courage, and I don't always, but just that courage is a big measure of success, about speaking out, not rudely, not disrespectfully, but just going, you know what, here's the bar. Let's all reach for that.
Thank you, Megan. I'm just going to whip around now. Megan, 30 seconds.
30 seconds. Okay, so front of mind for me at the moment is we've talked a lot about the evidence base, and then we started to talk a little bit about what works best. And I think that's the spot we've got to get to, is how do we take that evidence base, consider the diversity of the communities that we serve in education, and really tailor this to be able to meet the needs of those communities and the needs of those students. I think that's where our learning still lies, and I think that's where we can draw on others that we work with and other agencies who are doing this work with different communities to understand that more, so that we can get a little bit deeper in the way we're differentiating that support for our students.
Thanks, Megan. Angie.
My 30-second takeaway.
Your 30-second takeaway, or your measure for success?
I think my measure for success, I know I said this earlier, but it's really how we deeply and meaningfully embedding young people in all of the decisions that affect them through their education. Specifically, I guess in this conversation, are they involved in the design of the curriculum? As an example, are they given voice as to how it's delivered within their school? I think the example that Taj spoke to earlier was really fantastic, like giving young people agency within school and a voice. We've worked with some schools who have just been so creative and innovative in the way in which they embed student voice within their school community, whether it's, you know, letting their leaders or students select the external providers that they use, whether it's running a consent and sexual health week in which students run different initiatives and activations across a week. I think there's so many different ways in which you can be creative, but I think it's really giving students agency and voice. And sorry, that was more than 30 seconds, but that's my takeaway.
Thanks, Angie. It's a critical one. Patty?
I just think when we have evidence-based whole of school respectful relationships education in every education setting across the country, that for me will be success. That's not an outcome. That won't, but that's what we need in terms of this system in order to get where we want to, which is prevention of violence against women. But for me, the takeout, and it comes really strongly, I think, through all the conversations we've had today, is that this work is positive. There is joy in this work. This is about creating a future that our young people are really happy with. And to Bryony's point, that we're creating a workforce not full of people who are hard to work with. And so we need to look at this as not a chore, but as an amazing opportunity to create the environment we want into the future.
Absolutely. Thank you. And Helen, because I'm going to end with Taj and Brenna.
Okay, one little way, let's think of the teacher in the classroom to measure success in the here and now is if you got your students talking with each other about things that matter in everyday lives, and they did that in the classroom there and then, that's an indicator of success. That's what you're doing it for.
Fabulous. Thanks, Helen. And Taj?
I've got one little indicator of success and a little reflection. So I think one indicator of success is if a student thinks they're objectively better off. So if a student thinks they're now better off after this, that's just the perfect indicator of success for anything in education, and especially consent ed and respectful relationships. And then I think my little reflection is that throughout this process, it's just it's always been like we've always been talking to people, and it's about these discussions like these where it's seeing as many views as on this panel to allow for a intricate discussion from students to principals to people in the government to people in organizations who work with the government, that all these different perspectives, because there's no way any one person's two eyes can see everything.
So wise. Thanks, Taj. And Brenna?
My main piece of advice to educators would be to not give up. Sounds very sentimental, but you're not going to see immediate change. This is a societal issue. It will be something that is ingrained in the minds of students, and you're not going to see very clear results really until they're out of school. But it's something where you just have to keep going. You have to keep trying and hope for the best.
Thanks, Brenna, and thanks to everybody on the panel. Like, it has been, as Taj said, having a diversity of views has been really critical. There's been so much positive feedback and I agree that everybody on the panel has just done such an amazing job. But there's been a lot of feedback for Taj and Brenna and your insights, which you've shared so importantly with us all. So I'd like to say a big thank you, and sorry that we've gone over by 5 minutes by the time I wrap this up. But to everybody listening, the webinar recording will be available on the ANROWS website for on-demand viewing. So if your colleagues haven't been able to join, or your friends haven't been able to join Brenna and Taj today, then you can let them know it will be available. We'll also have a survey that'll pop up as you exit the webinar, and if you could take a couple of minutes to do that, that'd be fantastic, because feedback is always welcome. And it might be of interest for those of you who are on the webinar today that the National Community Attitude Survey report, which has been referenced in the research, focusing specifically on young people, will be launched online on December 13th. And you can register your interest via the link being shared in the chat. So thank you all again. It's been a real pleasure talking to you and discussing the issues around respectful relationships education, which are so community-wide. in terms of our response, not only for emotional and social wellbeing, but our response to violence against women and children and each other. Thank you for joining us today, and goodbye.